Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, March 9th, 2015, start of a brand new week, getting toward the middle of the month of March, which came in like a polar bear and is finally starting to mellow out. We're finally starting to get out of this horrendous record-setting winter, and already we're seeing two things. First of all, warnings across everywhere that got record snow to be prepared for record floods. And, of course, already the carbon Nazis are out there saying, well, this really wasn't that bad of a winter, and we've got a scorching summer ahead of us unless you pay your carbon taxes. And they simply have no shame whatsoever. Quick little program note, in our third hour, Michael Knox, chairman of the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation, will be our on-air guest to talk about this year's Peace Prize nominations, and the activities of that memorial. Certainly has a lot more credibility these days than the Nobel Peace Prize, which has just made a joke of itself by handing out prizes to Obama and to Al Gore for human-caused global warming and the rest of it. Our phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So getting into the news here, over in Russia and Ukraine, we're still seeing the rhetoric out there trying to get something going in Ukraine. And we have all of these politicians, U.S. officials, they're pushing Obama, send the weapons, get the weapons over there. And, of course, the problem with that is it's going to escalate the situation. And we are hearing from other U.S. government officials say, do you want to go down that path? Because Russia will feel justified in providing equivalent weapons to the Eastern Ukrainian republics. It's going to be a whole new Vietnam with our side sending in weapons and their side sending in weapons. A little proxy war. We didn't do too well from that last one here. Now, we are seeing reports, once again, this is from Russia Insider, that Kiev has not actually withdrawn their heavy weapons in compliance with the Minsk agreement. They're talking about Ukrainian journalists working for the Ukrainian media, not the Russians who've now all had their credentials yanked. Kiev did withdraw a specific type of artillery, 100-millimeter light artillery called the Rapier, which turned out to really not be all that useful in that area. But there are other heavy weapons. The howitzers, the Grads were driven off from the front line for about 5 kilometers, then turned around and returned to their backup prepared positions. So Kiev is not honoring the intention and spirit of the Minsk agreement. And we're seeing another report from TASS that Kiev's military has opened fire 25 times over the last 24 hours. Trying to get this conflict going again, because Kiev does not want the Minsk agreement to hold. Certainly the United States doesn't. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is once again warning Kiev that they are not going to get any more natural gas unless they prepay for it. No more credit. Kiev still owes Russia billions for natural gas that they've used. They've only prepaid enough for 2 days, and those 2 days have pretty much run out at this point. Now, more and more articles around the world are pointing out the lies and deceptions by the U.S. government trying to get a conflict going. And there's a very interesting article over here in Global Research, how Victoria Nuland lied to the U.S. Congress about phantom Russian hordes in Ukraine. And it's just been shameless. One of the things that she said, is she's still portraying the Maidan coup d'etat of a year ago, as peaceful protests by ordinary Ukrainians. They were fired on by Yanukovych. And we know that's an absolute, complete sham and a fraud. But she's sticking to the official story as much as she can here. Another story coming out of Sputnik News. Zbigniew Brzezinski has been exposed as having lied to the United States Senate about Crimea. They're still pushing the official line that Russia annexed Crimea, and that, of course, is not what happened. Following the coup d'etat in Kiev and the installation of the U.S. junta, Crimea said, we don't want to have anything to do with a government we did not elect and which clearly does not represent our best interests. So they voted to secede, and then they voted to ask Russia to merge, and Russia said yes. That's what went down. There was no annexation. And by the way, in the past, the U.S. has viewed annexation as a good thing. That's how the United States got Texas. That's how they got Hawaii. And looking back, the U.S. government admits, well, we were in violation of international laws, but we've got Hawaii and Texas, and we're not going to give them back, so there. Zbigniew Brzezinski is also out there saying that Russia's Putin is planning on invading NATO. They're out there with the fear-mongering saying, the Russians are coming to get you unless you give us your children and your money. I don't think Russia is really interested in invading Europe. When you look at the poor condition Europe is in because of the European Central Bank, if Russia were to invade Europe, they're basically invading and conquering an economic basket case. They don't really need that. Meanwhile, it's the West that continues to rattle the sabers and escalate the situation. Story out of Sputnik News, 5,000 military servicemen to take part in Norway drills near the Russian border. They're out there just rattling their sabers and daring Russia to do something in response, which will then be cited as the initiating event. Oh, we're off into war with Russia here. And everybody knows what's going on. Over at the Daily Sheeple, they're reporting crazed Washington drives the world to the final war. And that really is getting to be the global view of the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. They're nuts. They're out of their minds. They're getting into a war that is going to just slaughter millions, if not billions of people, devastate the ground on which it's fought, and bankrupt all sides. Which is actually the goal, because then those private central banks will say, well, we'll loan you the money to rebuild at interest. Take you 100 years to pay off. That's the plan here. Meanwhile, in the United States, again, trying to provoke a response from Russia, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that banks controlled by 3 billionaire friends of Russian President Putin have had their assets frozen in the United States of America to a total of about $640 million worth. Just trying to poke and get a response and then claim the response as the initiating event. Now, we're seeing from the other side a continuation of something we've commented on over the last few weeks. The people of Europe are not at all on board starting a major war with Russia. The first 2 world wars were fought on their territory. The scars are still visible all over there. They do not want the third. So we're seeing a story out of Veterans News now. Berlin rumbles Washington's hidden war agenda. Basically saying that Berlin and the rest of Europe, especially France, are moving fast, trying to get a diplomatic agreement with Russia regarding Ukraine to head off another U.S.-started war. More confirmation from RINF.com. EU increasingly abandons Obama on Ukraine. This is being reported in the German Economic News and Der Spiegel. And Europe just doesn't want to have any part of this. In fact, over at Russia Today, the EU is resisting calls from hotheads to supply arms to Ukraine, saying it is not going to get pulled into a confrontation with Russia. And the Europeans are saying, look, let's give the Minsk agreement time to work. We do not want a war on our own territory. If Washington, D.C. wants a war with Russia, let it be fought inside Washington, D.C. More confirmation about that. Blacklisted News. Germany has had enough with U.S. neocons. Berlin stunned at U.S. desire for war in Ukraine. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And in the last segment, we were talking about all these stories coming out of Europe where the Europeans are just really cooling on this whole idea of a confrontation with Russia. When it was just rhetoric and abstract, they were okay with it. They went along. When it became economic with the sanctions, they grumbled a bit because the sanctions are harming them worse than Russia. But now that they're talking about actual warfare in Ukraine that could easily spill across the borders and engulf all of Europe, they are throwing on the brakes. So, perhaps not too surprisingly in hindsight, over the weekend, there was an announcement by U.S. military officials in Europe that the plan to have Americans train the Kiev soldiers in Ukraine is now on hold. And the Pentagon issued a statement saying that the U.S. government would like to see the Minsk agreement fulfilled. And it's on hold indefinitely, which doesn't mean they couldn't reactivate it tomorrow. But I think what has happened here, the White House finally got the message that Europe is not going to allow a new world war on their territory. They're pulling the plug on all of this, and as usual, the White House is trying to make it look like this is all Obama's idea. Oh, we're pulling back from war in Ukraine. Isn't our president great? No, actually, our president got the message from Europe. They're not going to go along with this thing because those Europeans understand this is all about, which bank is in control of Ukraine, whether it's the ECB or Russia, and, which private central bank they're going to be enslaved to. Everybody understands that's what these wars are really all about here. Now, getting on to Ukraine, there have been some developments in the Nemtsov assassination case. As of the last word, the Russian authorities have arrested 7 individuals. An 8th is reported to have committed suicide with a hand grenade. And these people are primarily from Chechnya. And 2 of them have been linked to organized crime, suggesting a murder for hire. We don't know who may have signed the check on that. But at least one of the arrested individuals has admitted guilt. Now, that brings us to a rather interesting development that we ought to pay attention to, and it has to do with John C. Teft. He's our current U.S. ambassador in Russia, and as soon as he gets there, Nemtsov gets assassinated, prominent opposition figure, leading to political upheaval. When John C. Teft was in Georgia, a prominent opposition figure, Zvanaya, was assassinated, leading to political upheaval. And when John C. Teft was our ambassador to Ukraine, a leading opposition figure, Gongadze, was assassinated, leading to political upheaval. Seems to be a pattern there. As Ian Fleming once said, once is chance, twice a coincidence, 3 times, that's enemy action. So, over in Bulgaria, there are massive demonstrations against NATO. They do not want NATO in their country carrying out military exercises. They're standing up and saying, we don't need NATO, we don't need a war. And oddly enough, European President Juncker is saying that NATO isn't enough because not all member nations of the EU are members of NATO, and he's calling for a grand army of the Republic, or the Empire, or actually the European Union. The European Union now wants its own army, drawn from the member nations, to consolidate power under the EU, further eroding the sovereignty of the EU member nations. But we need a European army to counter Russian aggression. Russia isn't the aggressor here. Putin has been playing this very coolly and very calmly. Everybody in the world understands who's trying to provoke the wars and confrontation. Now, getting on down to Syria and Iraq, more and more people are picking up on the fact that ISIS appears to be a manufactured villain that has been put out in the field as a justification for invasion. And even over on Prison Planet, they're talking about how the last attempt to justify a ground invasion of Syria was based on weapons of mass destruction. And Putin came in and negotiated this deal for Assad to surrender all of his chemical arsenal for destruction and yank the rug out from under the U.S. invasion of Syria. Well, here we are, all this time later, and the U.S. is again back saying, we need a ground invasion of Syria because ISIS is there. That's the new excuse. Used to be chemical weapons, now it's ISIS. And this article at Prison Planet makes the valid point. ISIS could not be a more effective part of America's plans to overthrow the Syrian government and destroy the Syrian state if it had an office at the Pentagon. It's a made-up enemy to justify invading countries. We're not really invading Iraq and Syria. We're going after ISIS. Oh, ISIS is in Libya. ISIS is in Saudi Arabia. ISIS is... Wherever the U.S. wants to invade, ISIS is going to show up there. That's the scam here. Article out of Global Research, the relationship between Washington and ISIS, the evidence. And they're starting to dig out all these links about how U.S. assets are controlling and supplying and supporting ISIS in order to make them look like a credible threat justifying U.S. military intervention. Over at almonitor.com, they're carrying the story that the Obama administration is now saying the United States will protect Syrian rebel forces. Oh, those poor Syrian, we've got to protect them. And meanwhile, a U.S.-led coalition airstrike just destroyed another Syrian oil refinery. They're attacking the economic infrastructure to weaken Assad. And they're piling on the propaganda left and right. Over at Prison Planet, they have an article, Most Americans Favor Invading Syria and Iraq. And they qualify it with the following sentence. Remarkably, if the Quinnipiac University numbers can be believed, a majority of Americans want to send U.S. combat troops to Iraq and Syria to battle ISIS. Now, I don't believe those numbers myself. And the proper way to ask that question should have been, are you personally willing to go and fight ISIS in Syria and Iraq? And so I decided to run a poll on that very question. And 98% of the respondents said no, they are not personally willing to go and fight ISIS in Syria and Iraq. We actually got 3 votes that said yes, they're ready and willing to go, which begs the question, why are they still here? But just in case they're serious, we reposted to our main page the official enlistment form for the U.S. Armed Forces. It's a PDF. If you really want to wage war on Iraq and Syria, just fill it out, go on down to that recruiting office. They'll be happy to see you. And what I'd like is for all the Rivero's Rangers to download this PDF, print up a bunch of copies, have them with you, and anytime somebody says, we must invade this week's designated enemy, just hand them a copy and say, here you go. And I go right by the recruiting office on my way home, and I'd be happy to drop it off for you. And that form should be printed out and postal mailed. Not emailed, they ignore that. Postal mail to every member in Congress who was banging their hands for Netanyahu or who says, we've got to go into Iran or Russia or wherever, and say, when you sign yourself and your kids up to be on the front lines, then we'll take you seriously. Until then, no. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We've been talking about events in Syria, and we see this constant U.S. position that regardless of the outcome of what's in Syria, Assad must go. Assad must go, with the goal of the United States being able to cherry-pick a new government for Syria that will be friendly to Western interests, sell the Syria's oil for the dollar, allow private central banking, basically be another U.S. ally in power projection around the world. They've been at it for about 3 years now, still not working out. Other voices are coming on out and saying that any political solution in Syria, Assad has to be part of it. And there's this interesting article over in geopoliticalmonitor.com pointing out that the United States, based on its recent track record all over the Middle East, should have known better than to try and go into Syria and meddle there. Because all of these U.S. interventions are falling apart. We're stuck in these quagmires, Iraq and Libya. We've been stuck in Syria for 3 years now, and Washington, D.C. does not seem able to learn a lesson, going all the way back to Vietnam, that this intervention policy doesn't work out. I mean, the U.S. has been doing this intervention stuff since the end of World War II and scoring only a 50% success rate. But that success rate has declined in recent memory. And still they want to keep on doing it because that's all they know how to do. The people in Washington, D.C. know how to lie, loot the people to give to the bankers, order wars. That's it. There really isn't anybody in Washington, D.C. who knows how to care for our nation's infrastructure or is even interested in caring for our nation's infrastructure. They're out there playing Empire for real, or Risk, or whatever that board game is about conquering the world here. Rand Paul and 46 other Republican senators are threatening Iran over the nuke deal. Now, here's the issue with that. Members of Congress are not allowed to issue threats to other nations. That, too, is a violation of the Logan Act. Congress can declare war, But the threats and negotiations leading up to that are the province of the State Department and the White House. We're seeing this huge rift opening up between the White House and Congress over who's in charge of this whole Iran situation. And while I am not the biggest fan of Barack Obama, under the Constitution, negotiations and deal-making belong with the State Department, and that's a department of the executive branch of the White House. The only time Congress has anything to say about it is if an agreement is elevated to the level of a treaty, at which point the Congress must ratify it. But non-treaty agreements can and are entered into between heads of states, and Rand Paul and these other Republicans, and certainly John Boehner, have greatly overstepped their constitutional limits. Another article over here, GOP senators warning over U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations. 47 Republicans are basically out there telling Iran, look, even if you reach an agreement with Obama, the next president who comes in could just void it with a pen. And Congress is still out there, and again, this is the same Congress that turned a blind eye to Obama writing the law of the land for Obamacare and immigration and a bunch of other stuff from his desk. But now Congress wants to be involved in the Iran negotiations and saying that the White House cannot reach an agreement with Iran without the permission of Congress, and Congress will not grant their permission because they are all lining up for that APAC cash for 2016. But that may change as well. Over the weekend, there was this amazing anti-Netanyahu rally in Tel Aviv. Estimated numbers of people there, 50,000. And the video just shows them packed in. The theme of the rally was anybody but Bibi. And the people of Israel have really had it with Netanyahu. Following his speech to the Congress, the people of Israel are understanding Netanyahu is so focused on his war agenda, he's out of touch with the needs of the Israeli people. Their economy is also in trouble. Polls show that domestic economic policy is their top concern. Iran is way, way, way down on the list. By the way, here's an interesting development, and it's going to complicate things for the ISIS propaganda, because Israel's foreign minister, Avigdor Lieberman, has called for the beheading of all Arabs in the occupied territories if they oppose the policies of Tel Aviv. And this is going to put the White House propaganda corps in the difficult position of saying, well, Israel's beheadings of Arabs are good, but ISIS beheadings of other people are bad, you know? It's a double standard again. Lieberman is seriously saying any Arabs in the occupied territories who are not fully in agreement with Tel Aviv ought to just be beheaded. Now, here's an interesting development, and this is getting zero coverage in the Western media for reasons that will be obvious. Over the weekend, Iraq captured an ISIS military headquarters, and in it they found 4 foreign military advisors to ISIS. 3 of them had passports for both Israel and the United States of America, the 4th one for another still unnamed Middle Eastern nation. And we've gotten this confirmed from multiple sources. It was reported in Press TV, then picked up by a couple of others, Sputnik News. And again, this is a reminder. The U.S. created and is managing ISIS as a faux enemy to justify invasion and conquest. Now, these 4 arrested foreign military advisors have been sent to Baghdad. The government in Baghdad, at least nominally, is still friendly with Washington, D.C., so they may just say this all has to go away. We'll send these 4 off to Disneyland for a vacation, and that will be the end of it. Maybe. Or the government of Baghdad could choose to make a big stink about this. Why are you supporting the people that you told us you were fighting? And we've been hearing about all these stories about airdrops going in, U.S. helicopters carrying supplies for ISIS being shot down by the Iraqis. The government of Baghdad may see this as an opportunity to basically humiliate the U.S. and get them out of Iraq for once and for all. Now, obviously, the United States and Israel will disavow these advisors, Oh, they were hired mercenaries. They weren't really part of our official program. We don't know why they were there, which means these 4 guys are on their own. Which is a reminder for those of you who do the government's dirty work, if things go wrong, they will not come to save you. You will be allowed to just twist slowly in the wind, or whatever. We're looking here at Global Research, another article about photographic evidence of Israel supporting the opposition in Syria, and Israel has now threatened a Press TV Syria reporter over these photos. The ruse is coming apart, as it were. Now, here's a very bizarre story. Remember, about a week ago, Venezuela blew the lid off a U.S.-backed coup plot. Made the U.S. look really, really bad. Well, apparently, in retaliation, because I can't think of any other reason, the White House today has now slapped sanctions on 7 Venezuelan officials, freezing their U.S. assets and banning them from coming to the United States of America. President Obama has declared Venezuela a national emergency. That Venezuela poses a threat to us. The only way that Venezuela poses a threat to the United States is they continue to sell their oil for currencies other than the dollar. I am sure that Hugo Chavez, wherever he is laughing himself silly at this development here. But the U.S. is once again going into countries where they have no business and trying to change the government. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to talk about the economy. There's some interesting developments going on, and again, this is not something you're going to see on your TV newscast. There's an article over at goldcore.com, which is basically starts out by reminding the world that no single currency has dominated the globe for any long interval of time. It goes from currency to currency to currency. Currently, it's the U.S. dollar is the global trade and reserve currency. But apparently, the IMF, which has historically been one of the main agents of dollar hegemony, is now out there saying the dollar's reign is coming to an end. And apparently, the deputy managing director of the IMF is openly advising emerging markets in Asia to begin the process of de-dollarization to mitigate against external shocks and constraining the central bank's ability as lender of last resort. So even the IMF is seeing the writing on the wall. The dollar's reign as the global trade and banking currency is coming to an end. The U.S. is trying to prolong it through threats of military action, which is not going to boost anybody's confidence in the currency. In fact, by using threats and actually carrying out military action to protect the dollar, it only underscores the fact that the U.S. government knows the U.S. dollar's in trouble. Now, here we are, mid-March, and so far this year, more than a dozen central banks have cut rates, trying to keep the credit flowing, trying to get people to borrow money to do something with. And people aren't borrowing because we don't have the means to pay that back. We can't just print up new money out of thin air to repay the loans with interest. The euro has dropped 10% of its value so far in the first quarter. That's sounding a warning sign. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank is now beginning its economic stimulus program. Basically, this is Europe's version of quantitative easing. They're going to start creating, out of thin air, 60 billion euros each month to buy up private and sovereign bonds, which has one of two outcomes. The ECB will own all the hard assets, or the euro will collapse from the overprinting. Neither one of these actually improves the economy for the nation and the general public. It's just the mechanization of greed run rampant here. Very alarming story out of Bloomberg. Hedda damage spreads in Austrian downgrades and German losses. Austria has decided to wind down Hedda asset resolution. And that has sent ripples across the European financial system, triggering credit downgrades in Austria and bank losses in Germany. It looks like the dominoes, if they're not starting to fall, they're starting to tremble. Now, as you know, over in Greece, the Syriza government is coming up with a second round of proposals. The first ones were flat out rejected by the European Commission, the Troika, and Greece is going to submit a second suggestion, and it's already leaked out. This is over at Investment Watch blog. The Eurogroup is just going to reject anything Greece offers as a solution because the European Union, ECB's attitude is, you will do what we tell you to do. And they are taking that hard line because if they cut Greece any slack on the debt, other nations are going to want exactly the same thing. And the money junkies just cannot allow that. Austria is in serious trouble. They came up with a 7 billion euro shortfall. They need a debt restructuring. And the European Union is probably going to take the hard line with them just as well. Now, collectively, between the crisis with the euro, Greece, unpegging of currencies now, shouldn't be too surprising that demand for hard bullion, coins, silver, gold, physical, is continuing to go up. Now, that leads us to this interesting story where HSBC is reportedly closing all 7 of its London gold vaults. And people are wondering, why were they already empty? Remember, HSBC, only a few months back, were limiting cash withdrawals from their bank and imposing all kinds of requirements where if somebody came in and said, I want to take 2,000 pounds out of my savings account, the teller would say, why do you want it? What do you need it for? And it's none of the bank's business. It's supposed to be your money. And the bank is supposed to give it to you on demand, not quiz you what you want it for. They're acting like the money belongs to them, and it does not. So HSBC's gold vault closure is raising some red flags. Meanwhile, the Shanghai Gold Exchange delivered 38 tons of gold in the last week of February. Huge amount of it being bought up by Apple for the new iWatch. Apparently that's being manufactured and promoted as a prestige product. A wrist-sized iPhone, but it's coming, there's gold in it. And yes, they use a lot of gold in the manufacture of modern electronics. But apparently Apple is either expecting everybody on the planet to want an iWatch, or they're using it for decoration on the cases because they're buying huge amounts of physical gold right now. Alrighty, article out of Market Daily News. 10 facts that show the unemployment numbers are a giant lie. And they're going in there about this official U.S. government declaration that the unemployment rate is down to 5.5%, which is considered full employment. If we only have 5.5% unemployment, then this nation is fully employed. The economy has recovered. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. And this article is pointing out how all these claims about 5.5% unemployment just don't match the reality. We have 92.9 million Americans able and willing to work who are not in the labor force. 12 million lost since 2009. But the government doesn't count them. They count the unemployment solely people who just recently lost a job and are still looking. The people who've been looking for work for 6 months, for a year and a half, and they just give up. Oh, they go in a different category. They're invisible now. We don't mention them because it makes the numbers look bad. Now, there's a very interesting article that came out of Investment Watch blog. If you're unemployed, it's not because there isn't any work. And the link basically goes to a poster somebody was carrying, but it makes a brilliant observation. There is, in fact, plenty of work in this country that needs doing. Look at the roads, look at the bridges, look at the rail lines. Look at the general quality of our buildings and infrastructure. There's a lot of work needs to be done. But unfortunately, jobs are not created in this country to do the work that needs to be done. Jobs are only created in this country in the expectation that some money junkie somewhere will make a profit from it. And we understand that that's the way the private sector is supposed to be working, but not the government itself. The government is supposed to look out here in the country and say, yeah, there are some things in bad need of repair. Let's create the jobs to repair them. But unfortunately, our government is hopelessly broke, in debt to the central bank, and virtually all of the taxes that are being collected are going to political corruption, featherbedding, nepotism, Israel, propping up Wall Street and the war machine. We're actually in a wartime economy. They don't want to admit it. But that's exactly where we are right now. Meanwhile, article over in Reason.com, Republicans are poised to rubber stamp another debt ceiling increase. Apparently yesterday, Mitch McConnell basically got up there and made this heroic speech. I made it very clear. We're not going to shut down the government. We're not going to default on the national debt. We'll figure some way to handle that. What we can't loot from the people, we'll borrow from the banks. They're borrowing new money to make the payments on the old money is the situation that they're in right now. So we're going to be seeing this debate. Should the government raise the debt ceiling or not? And that is a false question. That's what they want you to think the debate is all about, but it isn't. The question you, the people of the United States of America, should be asking is not whether to raise the debt ceiling, but rather why the federal government, which is authorized by the Constitution to create and issue interest-free money, instead chooses to borrow that money at interest from a privately owned central bank, thereby plunging future generations of Americans into debt slavery to that bank. That is the real question Americans should be asking. Same thing up in Canada with this Comer lawsuit that's being suppressed by the Canadian government. Your government has sold you into the slavery of the very same predatory bank system we fought a revolution to be free of. We'll be back after our news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. We got a caller waiting on the line, but before we take that, I had to comment on that story that we heard on the SRN news break about Obama's reasoning for all of a sudden hitting Venezuelan officials with these sanctions because they are committing human rights violations and targeting their dissidents and opposition groups, blah, 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 blah. Talk about rank hypocrisy. Coming from the government that has been torturing innocent Iraqis to death to find nuclear weapons that never existed, rendition all over the globe, lying about countries to justify invasions, and this government targets dissidents for all kinds of disruptive activity. Go back and read the history of COINTELPRO. Just absolute hypocrisy coming out of the White House right now. Alrighty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. We're going to go with Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, man, the time they get through with the BRICS, I think every letter of the alphabet's going to be in there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Probably.
It's ridiculous. Venezuela, they want it because of their vast oil reserves.
That's exactly right. And the U.S. has been trying to overthrow Venezuela going all the way back to the time of Hugo Chavez, because Hugo Chavez ran his country for the benefit of the Venezuelans. He sold Venezuela's oil for currencies other than the dollar. And he said, you know, basically Venezuela is on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. It was only a week ago that the government of Venezuela basically outed a U.S.-backed coup plot against their current government. So here we are 1 week later, and, you know, Obama's trying to get the moral high ground by saying, we're sanctioning Venezuela because they're violating human rights. And the hypocrisy is just stunning on the face of it.
Hey, Mike, remember when Russia had was going to sell the Iranians the S-300 and they canceled it, and now they're doing the newer version, the was it the Anti-2500?
Yes.
I think it's called.
Yes.
That's version 3 of the S-300, or version 4. That's improved, but I think Venezuela received them also before the Iranians are getting theirs.
Yeah, I think you're right. I recall that. They're getting all these weapons. I mean, all these countries know the U.S. is going to get around to them sooner or later, and they're taking advantage of the fact that the U.S. plan has been significantly delayed, to get ready for it. And that's why, in the long run, I don't think the U.S. can win this new world war. And somewhere along the way, they're going to resort to their nuclear weapons, and it's going to be a bad day for planet Earth. But to the money junkies, they don't care. If the whole planet is laid waste, they'll just sit there with their printing presses and say, we will loan you the money to rebuild planet Earth.
Look how dysfunctional, though, NATO is now. They want, the European Union, some people want an army, and they basically muffed this up so bad, they're in panic mode, and you can tell, but look at how they're pushing all of the other countries into like the BRICS or the Eurasian Union.
Well, that's why the IMF is now out there saying, yeah, the dollar is not going to be the global trade and banking currency any longer, and the IMF is now advising emerging markets that they should de-dollarize to protect their own economic well-being. So the writing is definitely on the wall. Now, do you remember, obviously we all know George Orwell's 1984, but there was a book within the book, this forbidden pamphlet, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. And it turned out Orwell actually wrote that out as part of his thought research for the book. And it's stunningly accurate in terms of looking at the behavior of our current regime. And there's a quote in there that really strikes to home. The purpose of war is to destroy work product in order to keep the people working and struggling just to stay where they are. And that certainly seems to be true. And these money junkies have played this game over and over again, get two countries into a war, loan them the money to fight the war, destroy everything on both sides, and then loan them more money to rebuild it all, and they're your debt slaves for another 100 years. And they've been playing this dirty trick on human civilization for 300 years now.
And look, by next year, the 0.1% are going to have more wealth than the 99% of the earth. Now, something's wrong there. If people can't figure it out by now.
There's the fundamental part about it being wrong is for an economy to be stable and healthy, there has to be some mechanism for the wealth to be recirculated from the top back down to the bottom so that ordinary workers can trade their labor for money to put back into the system at the bottom. That's the part that has vanished in recent years. And that's why the economy is unstable and why it is doomed to collapse at some point, at which point all that money, the 0.01% think they have, is going to be utterly worthless. And the real wealth is going to be in the hard assets, and the post-collapse governments are going to nationalize those assets.
But some of them will put it into the, remember, there was that article that says by 2020, 40% of the workforce is going to be automated. So I think we're getting thrown into the dustbin, man. You know?
Well, the problem is you're always going to need people to be the customers. Robots don't buy products. Robots do not recirculate the money that is put into their development and operation. And so, and I know Bill Gates is out there saying, oh, this is going to be a really great thing. No, it isn't, because we're leading to a world where the factories are going to be full of robots standing around with nothing to do, surrounded by people with no money with which to buy products. And anybody who's looking forward is going to realize that robots are good for certain tasks, but unless we are able to find jobs for ordinary people to pump money back into the bottom of that economy, the economy cannot survive.
Hey, can robots get vaccinations too? Because they can get viruses.
No, they get oil changes.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, we'll let you go. We're going to take another phone call here. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Good to hear you out there today. Hey, I just had a question for you.
Yes.
If Obama constantly hears everything through the news, what does that say about his so-called intelligence operations and stuff that operate from Washington?
Well, I was going to get to that a little bit further on, but it's very interesting. And by the way, his claim that he only learned about Hillary's secret email account in the media has already been discredited. The White House knew about it at least last August. And now the White House is trying to say, well, it's really all the State Department's fault for not holding Hillary to account and the rest of it. But Obama's statement that he only learned about the secret email account in the news means that Hillary never gave him one of her private email addresses to use. And that's a horrible insult to the president. If that were really going on, Obama would be very angry. How dare you have a private email server and I don't get your private email? You're my Secretary of State.
Well, I think this goes clear back to Benghazi and everything like that. I mean,
absolutely. Hillary set up this server in the week before she assumed her position as Secretary of State.
Yeah, I wonder if her server gets all that spam email like ours do.
One can only hope.
Love you, Mike. Take care, okay?
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mo in Florida. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How you doing?
I'm fine. What's on your mind?
Oh, just want to make a comment. I was a couple days ago, somebody was talking about how foolish it was to try to attack Russia, and they were, of course, talking about the Germans or the Napoleon, and then the Germans, died on the Russian steppes. But that it won't be different this time, but it is different this time. We got ICBMs. That land mass doesn't even matter. And,
but they have ICBMs as well coming back the other direction, so I still don't think it's a good idea for us to get into war with Russia, okay?
No, I'm agreeing with that.
Okay.
I'm totally agreeing with that. I was saying the point they were making was that Russia defeated all these enemies because of the distance of, Siberia. And all that's a totally different situation.
Well, no, actually, there's validity to it. First of all, because we're going into a new little ice age here. You cannot win a war with missiles and airstrikes only. You've got to have people on the ground to control the territory. And again, we're going into another little ice age, and that's what wiped out Napoleon and wiped out the Germans as well. So, yeah, it's dicey. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Somebody in the chat room was asking, have you guys sprung forward because of the daylight savings time? We actually don't do that here in Hawaii. We're too close to the equator for it to have any kind of an influence, so I'm actually now doing the show an hour earlier in the day, my time. There are a lot of people who are wondering, why are we doing daylight savings time? It doesn't seem to save electricity in our more technological civilizations. And I wrote some commentary about that on the website, about just why it is we've got all of this daylight saving time and floating, and it all goes back to navigating of sailing ships. That our noon-centric time system all goes back to longitude calculations. All right, finishing up here with the economy. There is apparently a major upset in British Columbia, where the British Columbian government is planning to sell British Columbia's groundwater to corporate water companies for $2.25 Canadian for every million liters. And the British Columbians are very upset about that, because that is water that otherwise would be coming out of their wells and taps. And there are 82,000 people who have already signed a petition saying, no, that's our water. And you don't sell it to corporate interests at $2.25 per million liters for them to put in a bottle and sell back to us at $2.25 per bottle. And this is the latest expression of an observation made by the head of Nestle a year ago, that water should not be a natural human right, but should be commoditized. We'll steal it away from the people, then we'll bottle it and sell it back to them. That's how corporations think. Next, it'll be air. And by the way, that's already in existence in some of the more heavily air-polluted parts of the world, like in Japan. You can find these vending machines that have these little masks and tanks, disposable, that have clean, perfumed, flavored air for you to breathe if you're having trouble breathing. All right, so let's talk about Hillary Clinton's email scandal, because it is justifiably concerning a lot of people. Now, Hillary has responded by saying that she's sent all of the emails over to the State Department, and the State Department has come back and said, no, actually, she has not, because Hillary is sending what she thinks is the responsive emails, meaning emails responding to a specific request from the Congressional Investigating Committee into Benghazi. But Hillary is who decides what's responsive and is not. So we know she's not sending everything over there. And in fact, we're hearing from Trey Gowdy that looking at the emails there are huge gaps. Huge time gaps. And he points out one in particular. When Hillary was on her way to Libya with her little computer device in her hand, there are absolutely no emails from that day that have been supplied. Now, Representative Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, is out there telling Darrell Issa, you're not going to find a Benghazi stand-down order in Hillary's emails. It's not there in Clinton's double-secret archives. No, it isn't. It's still in the triple-secret archive. The Democrats are trying to protect Hillary because up until recently she was their number one front-runner for 2016. Now, as we were talking about with that previous caller, Obama is out there saying that he learned about Hillary's private email server in the media. First time I heard about it. This was the same lame excuse Obama said when the IRS targeting of his enemies became public knowledge. Oh, I just found out about it in the media. Really? You're the head of the executive branch. You're the president. You're supposed to know what's going on with your own people, don't you? But the really ironic situation is if we take Obama at face value, that he only just now found out about Hillary's private email server, it means that Hillary never gave him a private email address to reach her at. That's a horrible insult. How dare the Secretary of State have a private email server and not give one of the addresses to the president, her boss? If you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. However, Obama's comment about learning about it in the press is already inoperative, because we're seeing over in the Huffington Post that the White House knew about the private email server at least as far back as August of 2014. Because apparently much of the emails that had been turned over from the State Department included those private email addresses. Now, the White House is already out there with a new piece of spin suggesting that Hillary's private email server is really the fault of the State Department, not her. She's not to blame. Don't blame her for all the State Department should have reminded her of the rules. It's the State Department's fault for not enforcing the policy. Poor Hillary Clinton is just an innocent victim in all of this. But the damage may already be done. The good news is out there is that Mark Halperin is saying Clinton is no longer the 2016 favorite for the Democratic primary because of the bungling of the email scandal and the existence of the email scandal, and it's just brought back to mind all the baggage that Hillary is carrying. Travel office firings, cattle futures trades, Vince Foster posing with a cocaine smuggler in front of the White House Christmas tree, being fired from the Watergate Committee for unethical behavior, some of the stuff she was doing at the Rose Law Firm, and on and on and on. So the good news is Hillary Clinton's may be heading into retirement. Yes, she's got all the money, but I don't think too many of us will miss her that much. The bad news is the Democrats are already scrambling to find other candidates to bring to the fore, and they're even talking about bringing back Al Gore for 2016, Mr. Human-Caused Global Warming himself. What is it with the leadership of our two parties that all they can think of running as candidates are slime balls? Criminals, crooks, corrupt. It's angering. We need to draft Ron Paul for 2016. I don't want to see his kid get in there. His kid is just more of the same that we've had. Ron Paul was a man of integrity. And Cynthia McKinney, let's get her back in. We've got to get decent, if the good Lord had meant for us to have elections, he would give us honest candidates. Something along that line here. So Al Gore is now being considered as a viable Democratic candidate in 2016. Boy, the news just goes from bad to worse, doesn't it? And a reminder, during this whole email private server, $6 billion vanished from Hillary's State Department budget, and I'll bet you they're not getting any emails where that money went either. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as long as we're on the subject of computers and private email servers and the rest of it, there's a very interesting article over in Zero Hedge. It's hitting a point that we all need to keep in mind. By demanding encryption backdoors, U.S. government is actually undermining not only global freedom, but security. And we've been hitting this point for a very long time, because all of these weakened encryptions, these backdoors put in for the use of the government, don't stay exclusively for the use of the government. The cyber criminals find them or know about them. For all we know, most of the cybercrime is being done by NSA people on their weekends or something, because they've got the tools to do it. But this article raises a new dimension, the possibility that if the U.S. government mandates encryption and security backdoors in computer products, other governments will demand the same for products being imported into their countries. And it's going to turn out to be just an absolute free-for-all, where all the networks and computers and routers and laptops and smartphones are just riddled with security holes. Look like a vegetable colander. And every one of those holes is an invitation for some cyber criminal to come on in and create mischief. And the reality is that far from improving the security of our nation, the NSA's activities are, in fact, a big threat to the national security. Certainly far more real than claiming Venezuela is a threat to the national security. And as if to underscore that, there's an interesting story over at techworm.net where somebody was able to hack into NSA's website using just 8 hours of Amazon's cloud computing, totaling $104. Ed Felton, a professor of computer science at Princeton University, basically exploited the freak bug and hacked into the NSA's website. Now, as you know, the trial of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is underway. It's a show trial. Let's be honest about it. And we're not going to be able to change the outcome of that. He's being set up to be convicted in order to cement the official story in the history books, and we all know it's a fraud. If his attorney, Judy Clark, who has a past record of getting patsies to go along with the official story, Ted Kaczynski, the underwear bomber, so forth, if she were really working for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, she could get the case thrown out of court right now, just by showing the photograph of the remains of the backpack bomb, which is a black backpack with a white rectangular patch, and pictures of the Tsarnaev brothers just before the bombing where they're clearly wearing gray backpacks. And to top it off, you could show the picture of the gentleman in the black parka and khaki pants wearing a black backpack with a white patch before the bombing and photographed running away from the scene without the backpack afterwards. There is your reasonable doubt right there. But even though Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has pled not guilty, Judy Clark got up there in front of the jury and said, yeah, he did it. I'm his defense attorney, and I'm telling you he did it. Gee, Judy, do you think the government's going to let you actually pull that handle on the trapdoor underneath him when he gets hung? What we can do, though, is underscore how this is a kangaroo court and a show trial. Article over at 12160, flashing back on all the evidence that the Boston bombers were FBI assets and CIA assets. And they were set up to be patsies. And it's a reminder to those of you who are out there as informants for the FBI because you think it makes you special and superior and you go home and abuse yourself to old James Bond movies and say, I'm a spy, I'm a spy, I'm a spy. The government that you are betraying the American people to will turn on you and set you up to be killed if they think they can get something for it. Just something to keep in mind when you're out there looking in the mirror and saying, I'm special, I'm an undercover spy, I'm an informant for the Nazis, for the U.S. government. Because that's how history is going to remember you. Look at how history has judged the informants in Germany that worked for the Gestapo and the SS. Do you think history is going to be any kinder to you? Alrighty. Now, meanwhile, the family of Ibrahim Todashev down in Florida has now filed a civil lawsuit against the FBI for the murder, for his murder. The official story is that Ibrahim Todashev, after hours of interrogation by the FBI, and by the way, he just had knee surgery, all of a sudden flung himself at the FBI agent, and the FBI agent was afraid for his life and shot Todashev several times, including one shot right to the crown of the head, the kill shot. And, of course, the FBI said, oh, they acted within department policy and nothing bad's going to happen. But that's not stopping the civil litigation. And the civil litigation, the FBI is going to have to prove that Todashev represented some kind of a threat justifying lethal force. I'm going to take a guess here that the FBI will settle out of court rather than risk further damage to the official story. All righty, let's see. Interesting little article over in truthstreammedia.com. Over the last couple of weeks, we are seeing a replay of the anthrax scares. Envelopes of white powder being sent to various officials all across the country. It's like they're pre-selling a new anthrax scare. There's white powder coming. There's white powder coming. And I remember right after 9/11 and the hysteria over anthrax. And somebody spilled some coffee creamer in this little office area. And they immediately called the hazmat team. Police cordoned off the entire block. It just gridlocked Honolulu traffic for about 4 hours. Turned out to be coffee creamer. They're trying to find some kind of an excuse for people to go back to believing there's a terror threat here. Harper is just going ballistic on his terror. Terrorists are coming to get us. Terrorists are coming to get us. Harper, I don't want to be the one to point this out, but more Canadians are being killed by moose than by terrorists. So maybe you need an anti-moose law before you need an anti-terror law that infringes on the civil rights of the Canadian people. Because the moose is loose. Now, down here in the United States of America, we're continuing to see more fallout down in Ferguson. There have been resignations from the Ferguson police force. Now, no firings, no charges, no prosecutions. But Missouri state senators are now calling for dissolving the entire Ferguson Police Department and rebuilding it right from scratch, from the ground up. And I think that would be a good idea, because it would send a lesson to these other abusive police departments around the country that your jobs are not permanent. And this gets us back to the growing scandal over Homan Square up in Chicago, which is employing CIA-type torture on people. It's ostensibly justified by the 2012 NDAA, except that the NDAA specifies these torture centers are to be used for suspicions of terrorism. And Chicago's been using it to basically beat confessions out of ordinary criminals for which they don't have any evidence. Just get them off the street, send them to jail. Stress positions, shackling. Now it's come out that, yes, indeed, they are using waterboarding out there. Major protests against this. It's in all the European media. Chicago media is not even mentioning it. And neither Mayor Rahm Emanuel or his opponent in the runoff election are even commenting at all. It's absolutely off the radar. These disappearing civilians. There's a new story out here in From the Trenches. Oh. All right, I'll pick this up after we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as I was starting to comment before we went to the commercial break, there's a story out of From the Trenches World Report where more and more people who have been subject to this brutal treatment by the Chicago police are coming forward and saying that there's more than one. There appear to be 3 of these Chicago Police Department torture facilities. Corporate media is by and large ignoring this. Chicago media absolute shutdown on this. And neither Rahm Emanuel or Jesus Choi Garcia, who's challenging him in the runoff, are making this an issue at all. Meanwhile, there's been another unarmed black teen shot up in Wisconsin, not helping the situation here. And another article coming out of Ex Republic TV, the police in the United States, people have started finally collecting together how many innocent Americans are killed by police in this country, and the numbers keep going up, and they appear to be already about twice as much as the FBI will admit to. And that's not a number that they want you to know, because it's turning out that you are more likely to be killed by a police officer wrongfully than be killed by a terrorist or even a real criminal. Meanwhile, the New York Police Department, responding to criticism about those 9 bystanders who were shot over at the Empire State Building a while back, are saying, it's their fault. They walked into the police bullets. It's not bad shooting by the police officers. The police officers aren't shooting people. They're just firing the gun, and those bystanders just walked into the bullets, so it's all their fault. That's their new excuse. Now, as I reported on Friday, the White House is planning or has already carried out an executive order to ban a certain type of .223 ammunition with a steel tip. It's called a cop killer bullet, and Obama wants to ban those. And the police associations and departments came back and said, the reality is no police officer has ever been shot at with this ammo. And now we're hearing from Investment Watch blog that the White House is now looking at banning other types of ammunition by executive decree. All of this is unconstitutional. It's a violation not only of the separation of powers, Second Amendment. And Obama is not allowed to just ban things from his desk. All right, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Jason in Minnesota. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Jason, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. For a moment, I thought you were the Jason out of our commercial here.
I watch the Sunday morning shows, and I like watching dinosaurs, I guess. And speaking of dinosaurs, one of the shows, I forgot which one it was, had John McCain on it, and he mentioned that he was in contact with ISIS all the time. I found it kind of curious, and I found it kind of curious if there was not a follow-up question to that.
You may have been looking at a rerun because the video of McCain saying that he's in regular contact with ISIS, my understanding is that's from a few years ago. He's not admitting it today. If I'm wrong, of course, somebody please send me a link to the video and I'll put it up. But at one point, yes, McCain did say, I'm in contact with ISIS on a regular basis. He was photographed with some of the leaders of ISIS. And now with this new development out of Iraq, that American and Israeli military advisors were captured at an ISIS command post by the Iraq forces. It's more and more of the evidence is piling up. ISIS is a manufactured Hollywood-style boogeyman, complete with special effects videos, to give the U.S. an excuse to just go into whatever country it wants by sending in a group of actors and makeup artists and videographers to say, ooh, ISIS is here, come get me. Okay?
I understand. Keep it up, Mike. You did a great job.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're coming up here on the top of the hour, and our third-hour guest, Michael Knox. Little bit of a kerfuffle. As you know, over the weekend they had the 50th anniversary of the Selma March, the commemoration, and all the politicians went down there to march through the streets of Selma and recreate that heroic march. And apparently the New York Times, when it printed the photo of all the politicians coming across this bridge, they made a point of cropping George W. Bush and his wife Laura out of the view, so it focused on Barack and Michelle Obama. It's a minor, trivial issue, but you know these politicians, they'll take anything and say, oh, it's liberal bias, it's this, it's that. All righty, now Ecuador has taken an interesting step in holding off outside agitators. The Foreign Ministry is backing the publication of a book to be distributed to the people, detailing CIA destabilization actions in Ecuador and other countries of South America in order that the public be educated to look for the signs of foreign interventions. I think that's an excellent idea. I think every country on earth ought to be doing that right now. So that when these color revolutions and USAID and the rest of them come on in, the people are going to say, oh, I recognize what this is. This is another U.S. covert overthrow in progress. All righty. Apparently the pedophile scandal in Great Britain is really starting to take off. Story out of Daily Mail. More than 1,000 already questioned in sex abuse allegations. Detectives raid the homes of Leon Britton and the ex-head of the Army. Scotland Yard boss Sir Bernard Hogan Howe is saying that this is taking a huge amount of resources, but they're going to get to the heart of the claim no matter who was involved. Until Special Branch comes over and knocks on his doors and says, I don't think you ought to be doing that here. And by the way, Great Britain is not alone. Remember back in the 1980s, we had it here in the U.S., the Franklin scandal. A child pedophile scandal that went all the way up to the White House, and it entangled Boys Town and a bunch of other stuff. All righty, we're going to grab one more phone call here before the top of the hour. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I think the U.S. administration is is falling down, and particularly one aspect of it, Bush, Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, and what have you. Apparently they're being indicted in Germany for war crimes and torture because they've admitted in various interviews and documents and what have you that they're engaged in torture. And it looks like this trial is going to go ahead.
Well, it will be in absentia, and I don't expect that Bush and Cheney will actually wind up in Germany unless we grab them, crate them up, put them on a cargo plane, and drop them off ourselves. But it will help change the verdict of history as to who really is the bad guy in this world war.
Well, I think what it means is that if Germany does it, that means the EU. So it looks like several more nations where Bush, Cheney, and that crowd won't be able to travel to.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's going to break their heart tremendously here. But, I mean, like Henry Kissinger, I think there's something like 20, 30 countries he can't set foot in without facing immediate arrest. It happens, I'd like to see all of these torturers brought to trial. I'm not going to hold my breath. For one thing, before all of this started in 2003, the U.S. secured treaties with a lot of countries that U.S. officials on their soil would not be transferred to the International Criminal Court, which telegraphed the fact that they knew they were going to be committing war crimes before they even got started.
Yeah. Well, it may result in any overseas assets of these people being sequestrated and seized.
Oh, that would be fun too. I mean, nothing hurts a money junkie more than taking their money away from them.
Well, I think that's what the effort is.
Yeah, that would be a good one. Don't harm the money junkie, don't injure them, don't kill them, just take away their money and dump them on the street. Worst possible punishment you could inflict on a money junkie.
Absolutely. Okay, Mike, I just wanted to make that point. And as far as this paedophile scandal in Britain, it grows by the week and implicates more and more, right from the royal family down to the little red boy on the street.
Yeah, you've got Prince Andrew who's already been caught with Jeff Epstein's little pleasure island there in the Caribbean with the underage hotties and everything. And normally I don't go into this sex scandal stuff, except that we need to start really showing the world what the ruling class are truly like, what kind of mindset, sociopathic behavior they engage in. John, I got to let you go here. We got to take a break for news. Thank you very much for your phone call. And we'll be back after our top of the hour news break with our guest, Michael Knox. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And joining us for this hour is Michael Knox. He's the chairman of the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation. I just put his website up, a link to his website from my website. And the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation is out there trying to do the job that the Nobel Peace Prize claims to do, but has made an absolute mockery of, which is to identify people around the world genuinely trying to promote peace and give them the recognition they deserve. So, Michael, thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you, Michael, for having me on.
Okay, for the benefit of our new listeners who were not here the last time you were on our show, just give us a quick rundown on what the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation is all about.
Well, last year, as you know, American forces killed people in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Yemen, Syria. It seems to be all over the Middle East and parts of Africa. And we think that kind of war will just continue until Americans start to demand peace, start to demand an end to war. So if we're going to stop the killing, we've got to create a culture of peace in the United States. We have to have more Americans who feel comfortable demanding peaceful alternatives to war, demanding that from the representatives in Congress, for example. So we exist, the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation, to increase the number of Americans who speak out against a war or wars in general. And we do that by honoring those who have the courage. And it does take a lot of courage. You have to be fairly heroic to speak out against war in the United States. So we want to honor Americans who stand for peace, who have taken a stance publicly, not just talking around the water cooler to their colleagues at work, but actually publicly gone on record in some way as opposing war. So we have 3 projects to honor these Americans. One is called the U.S. Peace Registry, where we document what individuals have done, specific behaviors they've engaged in to oppose U.S. war. And you know, Michael, that you're already listed in the registry.
I'm very honored to be included in that because there are some amazing names. I'm very proud to be in the company of these people.
Well, thank you very much. So the Peace Registry is a publication that we continue to work on and add registrants to. I think we're up to about 165 registrants so far, organizations as well as individuals. The second thing that we do is raise money to build a monument in Washington, D.C., hopefully on the Mall, that will honor those who have spoken out against war. And that monument is expected to kind of offset or balance all of the memorials that already exist in Washington to people who have fought in wars, died in wars. If you look at many of the individual monuments, you see the person depicted as holding a rifle or a spear or a bow and arrow or a pistol, or their monument is surrounded with cannons. But there are no real peace memorials in Washington, D.C., or in major cities around the United States. So we would like to build the U.S. Peace Memorial to honor those Americans, and it's going to be covered with quotations from famous Americans who have had the courage to speak out against war, people like Helen Keller and various presidents of the United States, including Kennedy and FDR, and you're all familiar with Dwight Eisenhower's concerns about the military-industrial complex. So there'll be quotations to remind visitors to Washington that we have a long history from Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, even George Washington, to people speaking out for peace who are Americans. So we shouldn't feel that we can't do that. We should feel that when a war is occurring, that we have an obligation to review it critically and decide whether or not that's a good thing for our country and for the world, and speak out if it's not. So the memorial is a long-term goal. It will take years. We know the World War II memorial that opened 6 or 7 years ago took so long that many of the veterans of World War II had already died. So, it may take 10 or more years, but we're raising funds for that. And then the third aspect of our work after the Peace Registry and raising funds for the monument is to give an annual Peace Prize. And that's what you were talking about earlier. So in 2014, we recognized Code Pink Women for Peace. Previous recipients have included Medea Benjamin, Noam Chomsky, Congressman Dennis Kucinich, Bradley Manning, Cindy Sheehan, and we'll just continue to give this award to an American who's had the courage to speak out against war.
Well, see, that's the really good part. I'm sorry for interrupting here, but that's the really important issue. Because obviously the corporate media keeps saying the Nobel Peace Prize this and the Nobel Peace Prize that. But over the years, they've really discredited the prize itself with some of the people they've given it to, like Al Gore for global warming, Shimon Peres, Henry Kissinger, and, of course, most recently awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to Barack Obama upon his taking office. He hadn't even done anything, and he's since turned out to be one of the most warmongering presidents in history, to the point where the chairman of the Nobel Committee had to step down because of all the criticism coming in. And unfortunately, there's no provision in the Nobel charter for asking for the return of a prize, so Obama's going to be able to keep it. But at this point, the Nobel Peace Prize has discredited itself, and there's now a void, a vacuum, into which I think the U.S. Peace Prize is ready to step in there. And looking at the people you've already awarded it to, especially Cindy Sheehan, and not because she's more deserving than the other people who've won it, but because it was very angering to see Obama get the Nobel Peace Prize promoting war, and Cindy Sheehan, who literally put her own life on the line in terms of quality of life and the possibility of a decent, calm life, to go on out there and really agitate, against these wars. And so I applaud you for recognizing these people who truly deserve the recognition, because too many awards are given out by government and corporations, not for merit, but for propaganda purposes. You should listen to this person because they've got the gold things on the walls and the shelves, and you should not listen to that person over there because their shelves have nothing but dust on them. And so it is an important function, and I think it's long overdue. And I understand you're coming up on the nominations for this year's prize.
Yes.
And are you allowed to share some of the current nominees with us?
No, not yet at this point, because we don't want to discourage anyone, but we accept nominations from people who are our founding members. And these are the approximately 300 people who have contributed to the building of the memorial. And you can read about them and even join them by going to our website, uspeacememorial.org. And at the top you can click on donate, and you can see how to become a founding member. But nominations are from founding members, but they must be from those people who are already listed in the U.S. Peace Registry. And as you've mentioned, there are many, many important peace advocates already listed. Or there's someone who deserves the prize and could be listed in the registry, and as long as we get them listed by April 30th, which is our deadline for the nominations, that'll be fine. They will go forward as a nominee to our board of directors.
All right.
And, the information in the registry is the only information that we look at when considering who is deserving of the prize.
Okay, we have to take a break for 4 minutes for commercials, and when we come on back, I'd just like to continue on this theme about the U.S. Peace Memorial, its objectives and aims, and how people might become a little bit more involved in giving long overdue and denied recognition to those Americans among us who really, truly are working for peace and against war. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Michael Knox, who's the chairman of the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation. I've got a link from What Really Happened to their website. A lot of information there about the Peace Prize, the Peace Memorial, the Peace Registry. I was looking at the donor page. You've actually put a lot of your own money into this thing, so I don't think anybody's going to be able to accuse you that this is some kind of a cynical money-making opportunity for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a 501c3 not-for-profit, so we make reports to the state and to the federal government every year, and have a very limited focus. It's just the publication of the registry, the awarding of the Peace Prize, and then raising funds to build the monument. And I am a professor emeritus, retired, and this is my passion, I guess, for the rest of my life. I'm going to devote it to trying to make a difference in terms of U.S. wars, ending the U.S. wars.
Well, ending all wars, because if the U.S. were to go away, which looks to be very possible in the coming months, there are going to be other people who think war is their best solution. And in the long run, we need to look at some fundamental changes to the way wealth flows through our civilization, because there's a direct connection between our current system of private central banking and driving a nation and its people toward wars of conquest, which I know we don't need to get into that discussion today. I want to get on back to all these individuals that you've honored over the years who richly deserve to be honored, who are marginalized, often attacked by the corporate media. And again, going back to, Cindy Sheehan, Code Pink, Cynthia McKinney, who's not been your Peace Prize winner just yet. But when they came out and spoke against wars and what was going on, the corporate media would just pile on and try and smear them to the point where the average American media consumer would say, well, I don't want to listen to what that person has to say. They're being a kook and a nut. And some of the stuff that was said about Cindy Sheehan, it almost makes you ashamed of the corporate TV news, where this woman had lost her son. She was out there trying to make a point about it, and the corporate media was just constantly insulting her, and she's just trying to take advantage of her dead son, and just really callous and very cold things that were being done. So I was really delighted when she won your Peace Prize.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I think Americans forget that we have a long history of people speaking out against war. And it's not just the corporate media. It's a collaboration between the government and the media to make that has propaganda always. When you watch any of the networks, you'll see only one side of the story being presented. That's the side in favor of war and honoring the heroes, the people who serve in the military. And there's no voice from the other side. But looking at the quotations I was telling you about that will be on the memorial, these will all be famous people and remind Americans that we have a history. Like, for example, Benjamin Franklin said there never was a good war or a bad peace. Even Ronald Reagan, it surprised me when we found it, no mother would ever willingly sacrifice her son for territorial gain, for economic advantage, or for ideology. And of course, those are the reasons the U.S. goes to war. Albert Einstein, who became a U.S. citizen, said, "It is my conviction that killing under the cloak of war is nothing but an act of murder." And Dwight Eisenhower, "I hate war as only a soldier who has lived it can, only as one who has seen its brutality, its futility, and its stupidity." So I think we're just trying to remind Americans that we have a rich history of speaking out against war, and it's very cheap to talk about your feelings against war in front of the water cooler among colleagues, but it takes a little bit of courage, but we're trying to encourage people to go ahead and go public with that. Things like letters to the editor, organizing a rally, writing a blog, as you do, hosting a radio show, writing a book, an article in a journal, writing to your members of Congress. Congress people run every 2 years in the House of Representatives. So although we know that money plays a big role in that, they still have to get the votes. And we think that if people take the time to write to their member of Congress, it can make a difference. Things can change if they start getting hundreds or thousands of letters saying, pull the troops back, we can't afford the war, or it's immoral, whatever their point of view is about the wars we're fighting now, the people we're killing in Afghanistan and Iraq, Syria and Somalia and Libya. There's not a justification as far as I'm concerned for those wars. And I think if more people speak out, Congress will understand they won't be reelected if they continue to support these wars.
Well, there's definitely a growing trend across the country in opposition to these wars. We're a war-weary people. We're seeing the corporate media come out insisting that their polls are showing the majority of Americans are still willing to, have wars in these countries. And I think the salient question would be, are you personally willing to go fight against ISIS in Syria and Iran? And, of course, then the numbers change very quickly. One of the things I tell all of my listeners and readers to do is to print out the official enlistment form for the U.S. Armed Forces and have copies with you. And anytime you encounter anybody saying we should go to war in X, Y, or Z, just hand them a copy and say, here you go. Let's see you walk your talk. Fill that on out, and I will personally deliver it to the recruiting office on my way home tonight. And we have to put people on the spot there. We're almost out of time here, and before I let you have the microphone, I'm sure you're already familiar with the wonderful anti-war quotes that Mark Twain had in The Mysterious Stranger and the War Prayer, which he would not even allow to be published until after he was dead.
Yes. So we have some quotes from that. Yes.
Okay, we got about a minute and a half. Anything else you want our listeners to be paying attention to?
Well, I hope that we can increase the number of our founding members, because we're not going to go public with this and really seek public attention. Right now, I just speak to the choir, essentially, people who are likely to support us. We're not going to go public until we have 1,000 representatives, 1,000 founding members representing all 50 states. We're missing 10 states right now, and we're missing about 700 founding members. So there's a way to grow, and we need to grow this movement before we can go public and really take off.
All right, well, I'm going to ask all the listeners to grab that URL for the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation. It's linked to whatreallyhappened.com, and just take a moment to put it out on your social media and just send it on out there so that people can start finding out more about the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation and the 3 projects that they're working on. Mike, thanks very much for spending time with us today. We'll have you back in the very near future when you announce this year's award winner, and we'll have you back at that point. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and following up on an earlier observation about Apple buying up vast amounts of gold. And as I speculated, I finally went over to Apple and I looked at the web page for the new Apple Watch, and yes, the higher-end models are jewelry with 18-karat gold cases. The base model is something like $400, and it goes all the way up to over $1,000, and there's a special limited edition that's $10,000 for if you've got to prove that you've got more money than the money junkie sitting next to you. This is $10,000 to have the NSA strapped to your wrist, and I'm already thinking this is a new Google Glass. I don't think this is going to take off. These watches really don't do anything your smartphones don't already do. And you can take the smartphone and put it in a bureau someplace if you want a little bit of privacy. So I don't know how well this is going to work out, and Apple has invested a huge amount of money in it. That high-end model, the $10,000 model, that's got Google Glass written all over it. Now then, I want to get on to science and technology and global warming and the rest of it, but I want to preface it with an article that came out in Land Destroyer. Science is the New Religion. And they're responding to this article that came out in National Geographic, just bemoaning the fact that people don't trust science, that when scientists come out and say vaccines are safe, GMO is safe, a little radiation is good for you, humans are warming the planet, that people just aren't trusting science the way they ought to. And this article, Science is the New Religion, points out that rulers throughout history have employed any device to get people to go along with what they want to do. In older times, they would use the church. You have to go make war on the infidel because God says you have to. Well, religion is on the wane, especially in recent decades with the revelations about child sexual abuse going on among the clergy. And the rulers have now adopted science as the new motivating device. We have to do this because scientists are saying X, Y, Z. But we know that individual scientists are very corruptible by money, politics. They're blinded by their own religious delusions. And you should never trust science anyway. Science has not set itself up as a trusted source. The mere existence of the scientific method is an admission. Science can be wrong. Science makes mistakes. And reproducibility is the only reason to go along with a particular theory, not because some guy in a white lab coat with a TV show says this is what you're supposed to think this week. And I wanted to go over to National Geographic and respond to their original article about why people just don't want to trust science anymore, but they were not allowing commentary. So I posted it at whatreallyhappened.com. And I want to preface this by reminding everybody I come from a science background myself. I spent a little time with the nation's space program. I still consider myself a science hobbyist today. I love science, love teaching science. It's fun stuff, but we know science gets hijacked and distorted for political and economic gain. So, to those who are with the National Geographic, why should we not just blindly trust science? Alchemy, for one. Phlogiston chemistry, for another, major scientific goofs. Now, prior to the 14th century, astronomers, scientists, thought the Earth was the center of the universe because that's what the church wanted. And scientists spent hundreds of years of scientific research on the theory of epicycles to explain the inconsistencies between the church-approved view of the universe and the observed motions of the planets. And epicycles holds the record for the longest-running scientific goof in history. Now, 17th century doctors thought rubbing chicken dung on your scalp would cure baldness. They also thought leeches sucked disease out of patients, not just the blood. 18th century geologists thought the Earth was only 6,000 years old, again because that's what the church wanted. Prior to the 1950s, scientists thought proteins carried our heredity from parent to child. Until the 19th century, doctors thought infection was caused by bad air. That's what the word malaria means, bad air. Scientists were claiming cigarettes were actually good for you up until the 1950s. They even had a machine that would pump tobacco smoke into your rear end for therapeutic purposes. It's the origin of the phrase blowing smoke up your... You can figure out the last word there. Until 2005, doctors thought ulcers were caused by stress. And in 1999, National Geographic itself was the victim of what was called the Piltdown chicken hoax, a forged fake fossil that supposedly linked dinosaurs with birds, which is a valid theory, but this particular piece of evidence was a goof. So why does National Geographic think that we should all assume science has all of the correct answers today? Well, because science is a propaganda device. Scientists say humans are warming the planet. Science says vaccines are safe and harmless. Scientists say GMOs are good for you. Scientists say a little radiation is good for you, and on and on and on. If you want to trust science, trust your own science. Learn to think. Learn to analyze. Learn scientific method for yourself. Drug development programs used to have what was called a double-blind study, where a group of independent researchers unconnected with the development of a drug would go out and collect raw data. And then a second group of researchers unconnected with the developers of the drug or those who collected the data would then analyze the data and produce a conclusion. And the double-blind study existed because time and time again, scientists were found to be guilty of confirmation bias. They would see the evidence that confirmed what they wanted to have happen, and they would be oblivious to evidence that didn't. It's just human nature. And the double-blind study and scientific method exist because science recognizes human nature is faulty. Individual scientists make mistakes. They're corrupted by money, by political power, by the desire for TV shows. You all need to become your own best scientists, your own best analysts. And we're living in an age where schools are starting to discard science education in the curriculum because they don't want you able to figure out when you're being snookered by those highly paid experts in the white laboratory coats. Alrighty, now, on the theory that vaccines are harmless, it turns out that between November 2014 and mid-February 15, there were 117 vaccine injuries and deaths according to settlements in the vaccine court. And there may be many more that never got that far. People don't even recognize that's what's going wrong with them. Dr. Andrew Molden up in Canada is saying every vaccine produces harm. They are harmful. That's part of the process by which they're provoking an immune response. Apparently, the current flu shot is now deemed to be 82% ineffective. This according to the CDC, which is still out there saying, you should get your flu shot. You should get your flu shot. Posted a YouTube video where HPV vaccine is considered a crime against kids. And as it turns out, there may not really be a link between HPV and cervical cancer. The method by which that was arrived at has come under serious doubt. We'll be right back after these commercials. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're just commenting on the fact that the same people are telling you that vaccines are safe are the same people are telling you GMOs are safe, glyphosate is safe, aspartame is safe, mercury is safe, radiation is good for you, and humans are warming the planet. Now, here's a very, very tragic story here. This is coming out of Chicago, Cook County. Tiny little baby, 9-month-old little baby girl, was apparently crying a little too much, and a 52-year-old woman has been taken into custody after silencing this 9-month-old girl by slicing her neck with a circular saw. And you must be thinking to yourself, what on earth would cause anybody to do that to a little baby. And it's right there in the third paragraph of the story. This woman had been taking antidepressant medication. And apparently, along with killing the little baby, she inflicted injuries on herself. She's now basically in Mount Sinai Hospital, and they're saying her condition has stabilized. There is a huge record of these prescription antidepressant medications, SSRIs in particular, triggering unexplainable acts of violence in people who are taking them, or even worse, trying to withdraw from them. Almost all of the mass shooters being wagged at us by the gun grabbers were either on or withdrawing from these medications. May have even been all of them. But more recently, the medical records of these mass shooters are being withheld from the public because of the privacy considerations. No, they're protecting the pharmaceutical corporations. A while back, I'm going to have to hunt this down again, we had this amazing video over in Connecticut where a public interest group was trying to find out what medications Adam Lanza was on. And we know he was on some medications, including at least one antipsychotic with a history of triggering irrational behavior. And this representative from the Connecticut Medical Examiner's Office, Patrick Quanahay, came into this meeting on video and said, even if in this one case the medication had triggered this behavior, that was not something the public needed to know because it might discourage them from buying and taking the recommended medications. And when you look at how much of Connecticut's economy is tied up with these pharmaceutical corporations, you can see what's going on. Which gets us over here to this other story that was over in Investment Watch Blog. Ex-pharma sales rep speaks, we are trained to misinform. We know the drugs are dangerous. Our job is to push them anyway. Another story coming out of Natural News. The same mercury that's used in vaccines is now linked to causing autoimmune disorders. Now, if you're not sure what that means, an autoimmune disorder is where your body's own immune system turns and attacks you. It's thought to be behind many forms of arthritis. And so now we're having an indication that a lot of people walking around dealing with arthritis today may have been put in that condition through being vaccinated with vaccines containing thimerosal. Alrighty. Let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. And yes, spring is finally, belatedly arriving. And people are looking back at what was just an amazing winter. Story out of Daily Mail. If you thought winter was tough, try living on Plum Island, where record snowfall has left basements flooded with raw sewage, people forced out of their homes. Wild coyotes are roaming the streets. The winter was so bad that drivers leaving Plum Island to the mainland across the single axis, they had to form convoys and be escorted by the National Guard to get there safely. And the carbon Nazis are already out there with their counter-propaganda. Naomi Wolf had this article called Oligarchy and Climate Change, a Catastrophic Coincidence. And Naomi's out there saying, the alarm bells of climate change have been ringing in our ears and humanity is failing to change course. What is wrong with us? And so we have the snow from this last record-setting winter is only now starting to finally melt, and the carbon Nazis are back pounding the drums of human-caused global warming and how we have to pay carbon taxes and allow a global environmental authority to decide how we're going to live our lives. And setting a new nadir for pathetic excuses to not have to admit they were wrong when they said snowfalls are a thing of the past is this article out of NPR. NPR has an article that says human-caused global warming is real. And the only reason we're getting all this record snow and ice, it's China's fault. Because their pollution is up there changing the weather patterns. Global warming is real. You've got to pay carbon taxes. All that snow and ice, it's all China's fault. Now, a little reminder here. Climate on Earth is dominated by solar output, which is at record lows, and the slowly oscillating shape of Earth's orbit from circular to elliptical and back to circular. When Earth's orbit is circular, we get the warmer interglacial periods, which we're in right now. When the Earth's orbit becomes more elliptical, then it spends more time further away from the sun at the far end of the ellipse per Kepler's laws of orbital motion, and we get the ice ages. Now, Al Gore and his cronies cannot control the sun. They cannot change the Earth's orbit. This whole hue and cry about human-caused global warming is nothing more than a giant money-making scheme to sell carbon credits and to impose carbon taxes and to trick the people of planet Earth into letting a new global government tell you how you must live your life, to save Earth from you icky-poo human beings. Another story out of 21st Century Wire. American researchers say climate change caused serious conflict. Oh, they had a drought from human-caused global warming and it led to war, and that's why we've got to fight human-caused global warming. And, of course, 3 years of the U.S. attempting a covert overthrow of Assad have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the violence going on in Syria. It's all because of global warming. These people have no shame at all. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Down in Florida, their state environmental officials have now banned the terms climate change and global warming from all official communications, saying that all official communications from Florida's environmental authority have to deal in facts, not hysteria, hype, and propaganda. Final little interesting story coming out of here. This was over at CBS, no less. Apparently, the FBI has authenticated a 2009 letter that was sent anonymously by FDA staff to President Obama describing systemic corruption and wrongdoing that permeates all levels of the FDA. And the FDA has said, yeah, that came from our people. And what this means is that lawyers who want to use that letter to demonstrate that the FDA is not doing its job properly in the public interest don't have to go through weeks of tedious discovery anymore. And this is going to be a major headache for those drug companies who defend their drugs in court saying the FDA said this product was fine and we did everything they asked, and so you cannot hold us civilly responsible for the damage this drug caused. This will have repercussions. And finally, as we mentioned, New Jersey has ended water fluoridation. They ended it here in Hawaii back in the 1990s. New Jersey Mayor cheers end of town's mass medication through fluoridated water. Now remember, drinking fluoride has no demonstrable effect on tooth decay, which is what it was sold at. But fluoride is a mild tranquilizer. And it seems that the push to fluoridate all drinking water, and now they're talking about doing it with lithium, was about keeping us calm and tranquil, keeping us on our soma so we don't rise up against the government when it does really stupid, boneheaded things. All right, there's the music. I got to get out of here and get some animation done, pay some bills around this place. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, stay angry, make good choices. Please share everything that you learn on this show with all your friends in social media. We're trying to get the word out before this world war gets to that nuclear phase, and that's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.